We are the world's #1 deodorant. What is really important to us is essentially getting people to move. If you move, you're probably more likely to use deo, but also if you move, you feel better, you feel more revitalized, uplifted. You just get more out of life.
You have partnerships that you've done as Rexona, but then you also have Unilever that's gone and done huge kind of global deals with whether it's FIFA, UEFA.
Do you know what? It would be a complete lie to you to say that we were drawn to those clubs because of their women's teams.
Does the audience come first, or do brands need to invest to help build the audience?
We don't go into any partnership thinking that this is a badging exercise. It's not. I would love to work on an Olympics, like absolutely love to, but
Hello and welcome to the Sports Pundit podcast, the show exclusively for the people shaping the future of sport. Driven by my curiosity working within the industry, I started this show to host conversations with decision makers from the MLB to the ICC, unpacking their strategies and industry shaping ideas. So on today's episode, I'm joined by Em Heath, Global Brand Director at Rexona. Known as Shaw in the UK and Degree in the US, the brand is a key player globally in Unilever's personal care brand portfolio. Formerly a sponsor of Williams F1, the brand has taken a serious liking to women's football, partnering with Man City and Chelsea, doing deals with players like Lauren James and Lucy Bronze, as well as playing a key role in activating around marquee properties like the Women's World Cup and Women's Euros. As part of Unilever's broader partnerships with FIFA and UEFA, we're going to explore interest in women's football and the nuances of activating across almost every area of the women's game, the role that brands can play within women's sport, and the intricacies of managing a global brand. So without further ado, I'm delighted to have you join me on the Sports Pundit podcast. Thanks so much for coming on.
thank you for having me. Lovely to get to chat to you.
Yeah, so as I said there, I guess the intricacies of managing a global brand, I guess, is probably the place to start, because it would be great to just hear a little bit about what your role entails and how you've ended up in such a role.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a broad role, I won't lie, but I think for the purpose of what we're discussing, my role involves looking after all of our global IP rights partnerships as well as any of our global ambassadors. I've worked on Rexona for coming up to 10 years now, which is makes me feel a bit old. And I originally came to the brand because it was one of the few brands in the Unilever portfolio that I felt really spoke to me in terms of what interests me both inside of work but also outside of work. So I am a sports junkie, as I like to call myself. My life revolves around sport, not just from the point of view of consuming sport, but also I just love to be active, and it's really how I manage to de-stress and process stuff. It makes me feel great. So I wanted to come and work on Rexona because I've had a kind of connection with the brand. And during my time in Rexona, I've worked on everything from like product innovation to social media, and now more recently, or over the last few years, being the one that set the strategy for how we work with partners, and then being in the daily in terms of how that comes to life within our markets. Rexona is a massive brand, by the way. I think you commented at the beginning. It's got a few other names. It actually has 5 names around the world. So when it comes to managing these partnerships, it can be quite complex. But with that, it's quite exciting because no day is the same. So it's a very broad role, but it's a very exciting role.
Yeah, we'll try and get into a few of the areas you touched on there. I guess the place to start would be, I think most people will have come across Rexona in one of its brand identity around the world, but maybe are less aware of kind of like what the brand stands for and the vision of the brand. And you said that that spoke to you. So maybe it's worth just giving a kind of clear and concise overview of what it was or what that brand ethos is
Yeah.
for anyone listening.
So firstly, for depending on where you sit in the world, so Rexona is the majority of brand name for the markets out there. But if you're in US or Canada or the Caribbean, it's Degree. If you're sitting in the UK or Ireland, it's Shaw. If you're in South Africa, it's Shield. And if you're in Japan, it's Rexina. So that just gets that sorted and out of the way. Um, we are the world's #1 deodorant brand by quite a big way. So it's very likely that at some point your listeners would have come across us. What we stand for is essentially we are what the category stands for deodorant, but what is really important to us is movement. People being active, people doing sport, people doing daily movement. So what is really important to us is essentially getting people to move. If you move, you're probably more likely to use deo, but also if you move, you feel better, you feel more revitalized, uplifted, you just get more out of life. So in any way that we are activating, movement is at the heart of it. because it gives us something unique to talk about. It gives us a story point of view. It's really the purpose of the brand and why we exist.
Brand slogan, "It won't let you down," is still in play, and that's consistent across all of the regions. So I guess that's something that you can really lean into because that's relevant regardless.
Yeah, depending, no matter which market you're in, it won't let you down has been something we have been saying for coming up 80 years now. And it's really important to us as a kind of proof point of the brand, but almost a promise to our consumers that we give them the best that we can give them. It's got a huge amount of like functional storytelling to it, but it's also very emotional in the sense of like we're saying that we won't let them down. So it's brilliant from a creative point of view, but it's also something that helps connect consumers that this is from Rexona. It just reminds them that it's from Rexona. I remember it when I was a kid watching, like, Shaw campaigns, like the whole "It won't get you down" thing and the spray tick on the back, like, I remember them myself from my childhood.
Yeah. Yeah, and the tick, I'm guessing, is also consistent, so it would look very similar even if the name's slightly different.
Yeah, basically, it's literally just a name that's different, so everything else is the same. There are nuances of how the products are different, and that's just more to do with where you are in the world and how people like fragrances and so on, but essentially, it's just the word that changes.
And in terms of how you think about brand partnerships, like, are there specific markets where you're activating a lot more heavily? And are you looking for IP that resonates across kind of a global audience?
Yes, our overarching partnership strategy is the same no matter what market, in terms of we go after partnerships that help us connect with consumers in a more engaging way, leveraging culture. All our partnerships have movement within them, whether that be partnering with like a marathon series, whether that be partnering with an entertainer who is known to dance, or whether that's partnering with big football properties. So that is essentially how partnerships start. Now, depending where you are in the world and depending how big the brand is, will depend how much you are investing behind partnerships. But I would say we have this sort of one approach to the strategy, which has the ability to flex depending on your market. I'd say in the most recent years, a lot of my personal time is in the football partnerships, and that's because the size of the partnerships are so huge. I mean, our clubs through Manchester City and Chelsea are some of the most worldly known clubs. They aren't just UK clubs, they're known around the world and their audiences around the world. And then the same when you look at the likes of FIFA or UEFA or Copa Libertadores and AFCON, they're massive properties. And so they require a huge amount of like resource from me and my team to get the most out of them. So, from my personal experience, like football is really where I'm spending a lot of time. But when it comes to the individual markets, they might be spending more time on dance or other things.
Okay. Because I guess one of my curiosities when I was doing the research on the brand and your partnerships was you have partnerships that you've done as Rexona, but then you also have Unilever that's gone and done huge kind of global deals with whether it's FIFA, UEFA. I assume the Copa Libertadores deal and AFCON was also essentially Unilever deals. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you go about activating in those partnerships? And then how do you play alongside the other kind of like personal care brands within the Unilever portfolio? Because I know you were previously a while ago at Dove, which would probably be a brand that to the outside world is quite similar to in a lot of ways in terms of being kind of like mass market and like very popular, similar-ish kind of packaging and ethos to someone that's not kind of like looking at it every day for work, at least.
Yeah, I mean, you're breaking my heart a little bit that you're thinking about the same as job. Um, no, it's a really fair question, to be honest. I mean, so Unilever is doing the partnerships for some of these, like as you say, FIFA, UEFA, AFCON, etc. It's it's Unilever personal care specifically. So it's not the entirety of Unilever because that would just be absolutely crazy. So it's only those brands that fall within that category. And to be honest, even within that, it's the headline brands of Rexona, Dove, Dove Men Plus Care, and Axe is referred to as Lynx in the UK.
Yeah.
Um, Even though we may look quite similar, I guess, from the outside and from a consumer point of view, the brands actually have very different identities and personalities and usually talk to a different kind of target consumer. So we at least try within internally to separate out those brands. that we aren't all competing with each other, because at the end of the day, we should just be competing with everyone outside of us. When it comes to things like FIFA, again, we try to have our own swim lane that we stay in. Now, Rexona is Unilever's, like, most associated brand when it comes to sport and football. So it's a really obvious play for us to be almost in the traditional way that you would expect the partnerships to come to life, and we are the brand that is probably going to be activating the most because it makes so much sense. And then like Dove and Dove Men Plus Care and the Axe, they come in at their own angle. So if I was to look at Axe specifically, they are they are usually for a younger audience, probably your Gen Zs, your Gen Alpha. Um, and so therefore they really tap into the culture that's with them. And they go after the music side of things or the party side. So, they want to do a lot around the FIFA World Cup when it comes to the show. So like the opening show or the closing show to ensure that they have moments they own that are unique to them within our portfolio. So there is the ability to separate the brands, and actually it's really important that we do that because that helps ensure that we, as I say, we're not competing against each other, and we just keep our eye on everyone externally. I'm not gonna lie when I say, when we started this whole shared partnerships with the Women's World Cup, there was some, like, teething issues in terms of ensuring that we weren't stepping on each other's toes, but I think I'm quite confident when we get to the Men's World Cup next year that it'll be very clear that we are very different brands.
Yeah. I guess when it comes to partnerships, the sports partnership that stands out to me from Dove's perspective is, well, Dove Men Plus Care is their rugby partnership, and like they seem to focus more on that. Or I guess you've kind of got the juxtaposition of hardcore rugby player, but then soft like dad. I think there's like an advert with Danny Care where it's kind of like him training and then with his kid.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yes, so they really champion the sort of the I guess the care side of, sport. I'm not a Dove Men Plus Care expert, by the way. I worked on female Dove, but they've always gone in to champion that you can, even though you're a high performing athlete, that doesn't mean that you can't still be a really caring and nurturing dad. Or I think when they did the UEFA European Championships last year, they were very much building their content and conversation around the role of a coach versus the player. Dove Men historically has been in rugby, and they still are in rugby. But I think what we're seeing more and more at Unilever is you can't really have like, oh, Dove Men is your rugby brand and Rexona is your football brand or Dove Female is your tennis brand. That's just not how the world operates. If there's an opportunity in a global stage that makes sense to multiple brands, we should all be there, to be fair.
yeah.
So I think that's what we're seeing more on. It's just, I think historically, Dove Men has really played into that rugby area.
Yeah. Well, you kind of answered my next question, which was going to be like, do you divide by sport or do you divide by narrative and then you can actually both operate in the same sport? It's just your narrative around how you activate would be different.
Exactly, because to be honest, I don't really want Dove Men to turn around to Rexona and say, "Yeah, you can't do rugby." And on say on Rexona, we do tennis. We've got the ATP final, and that shouldn't stop Dove connecting with the likes of Venus Williams or Coco Gauff. We shouldn't be in that. It's just what is really important is the narrative is distinct.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think there was a recent partnership that made the headlines, which was Gotham FC, the NWSL team, just did a partnership with Dove, which obviously, like, as I'd been researching around this, I was like, I thought Rexona was the women's football brand, but that's not how you think about it. It's like you activating a different way, which is much more focused on performance and building up pathways for female participation. And they're much more focused on the kind of care side of things.
Yeah, I'm not gonna pretend I wasn't slightly jealous that Dove went and got Gotham FC because in terms of, like, US female football clubs, that is definitely up there with, like, some of the most famous. But
Yeah.
the way Dove comes at it is how can they use sport as a platform to make girls feel more confident in themselves, in their body? Whereas what we do as Rexona is we use the likes of Man City and Chelsea to help girls know that there is a place for them in football, whether that be on the pitch, whether that be around the pitch. And we want to see fundamentally more girls participating. So they are distinct. And I think Gotham FC is Dove's first kind of foray into partnering with a football club. So it'll be really interesting to see, how it comes to life and how the fans react. And yeah, it'd be really interesting.
Yeah. So Carolyn, who's the owner and CEO of Gotham FC, is a reader and hopefully listener also of Sports Pundit.
Oh, hi, Carolyn.
Quite a bit. But yeah, in terms of focusing on yourselves, I think like before we go into that Man City and Chelsea partnership, which I'm really curious about diving into a bit deeper, I just wanted to get one more question out the way, which is kind of a more kind of broad brand question, which is around how you balance sports partnerships with other areas, right? Because obviously there's social media advertising, there's traditional advertising. Like, where does sports sponsorship fall within kind of like the broader Rexona marketing mix? And how much of that do you oversee?
Oh, I don't oversee everything because that would be quite chaotic. I wouldn't it be great if we were like maybe 20 years in the past where the media landscape was so simple. It's like, oh, here's my TV asset and here's my in-store materials and here's some banners. And that was it. But now the media landscape is constantly changing. And therefore, with that, we need to constantly change and innovate and really think about what is the best way to help our consumers connect with what we're trying to tell them. So when it comes to, say, the role of the partnerships, they shouldn't just be this thing in silo on the side. That's not how it works. We look at how those partnerships make our product innovation stories better, more engaging, more compelling, more meaningful. So, if there's a role with the partners to help tell that story, then actually the partners come into probably what you would call the more traditional media as opposed to just being something that might come through in the likes of social media or sort of in stadium materials. But we really try to ensure that, where when we're working with a partner, that partner is there to help essentially help tell a better story for our brand and product. So those worlds need to come together and not just be separated. Similarly, when we've got the likes of our Breaking Limits program, which is it's very different. We're trying to sell deodorants, but at the same time we have a social impact program. There is that ability for the social impact program to also talk when we're talking about our products because you can connect the stories of we want people to buy into products that work better as you move. Well, we want to make sure that those that don't have the opportunity to move also have that opportunity. So there is a way of connecting those stories. Similarly, we like to bring our big partnerships to the Break Limit program. So at the moment, we have a series that we have created with FIFA specifically called Girls Can, which is a series of training modules which help coaches, teachers, community workers understand how to ensure that girls feel comfortable, safe, and wanted within football. And that's part of our Breaking Limits program. So there's the ability to bring everything together and not just keep everything in its own individual lane.
Yeah. And I think one area that was quite interesting on that front is the way that you also leverage player ambassadors as well as clubs. And it quite often seems to be the case that the ambassadors are players at clubs that you also work with, which allows you to kind of cross utilize the two. Um,
It's wonderful when the clubs have players that make sense to us from a market point of view. So typically what you'll see is within the likes of Chelsea or Man City, we partner with ambassadors that represent our biggest territories. And sometimes isn't always a perfect science. So there are quite a few instances where we go and get independent deals with ambassadors because we just don't have the kind of roster within the club. So we've got Christian Pulisic for our American market, but he's at AC Milan, along with Santi Jimenez for Mexico. He's also at AC Milan. And we've got Vinicius Junior at Real Madrid, um, and Luis Diaz at Liverpool. So it's not always perfect, but yeah, a majority will sit within the club partnerships.
yeah. And I think you've recently done a deal with Lucy Bronze.
Yeah, I mean, like recently, as in probably I think 1 or 2 weeks ago, it's finally like completed out there. And I've kind of been in awe of Lucy since I think around the 2019 World Cup. She's an incredible talent, and I'm so glad we have the opportunity to work with her now that she's moved to Chelsea and just becomes a bit more accessible. Um, we've literally just signed, so now we actually get to do stuff with her. But it's a really exciting time, especially with the Women's Europeans coming up and how she's such an icon within the sport, but also for girls like aspiring to what a future could look like for them in football. So super excited about this one and can't wait to get shooting with her in a couple of months' time.
Yeah, and I guess for context for people, she was previously at Barcelona and has now moved to Chelsea.
Yes. Thank you for leaving, Lucy. Brilliant.
Um, I guess, yeah, just to go back to the Chelsea Man City thing, like when you were picking out club partners, obviously they're two clubs that put a lot of emphasis on their women's teams, as well as having very successful men's teams as well. What was it that kind of drew you to working with those clubs in particular?
Yeah. Do you know what? It would be a complete lie to you to say that we were drawn to those clubs because of their women's teams. We've been with Chelsea coming up 9 seasons and Man City 8. And the reason we kicked off partnerships with the clubs was actually because we were struggling to engage with men and connect with men in a way that was meaningful to them. Um, men and women, we don't operate in the same way. And the way that we engage with advertisement is fundamentally different. And so therefore what we were creating, probably more leaning towards the female side, just wasn't connecting. So after loads of research and loads of strategy building, we came to the point that the most logical place for us to really connect and engage with men was via sport. And within sport, football is the world's number one sport. So it made sense that we went to football. We started out with doing a pilot with the UK, with Chelsea, and then it was actually Southampton and Everton because we're trying to get a bit of a national spread of clubs.
Yeah.
And then from there, we went and formed deals with Chelsea and Manchester City because actually what we looked at was that these clubs shouldn't just appeal to our UK market. They needed to have that global stature, but we needed to ensure that we didn't have two clubs that were kind of competing within the same like national demographic. So we didn't want to have like a Chelsea and an Arsenal. We needed to have a spread. So we went for Chelsea and Manchester City. And again, it was with the lens of we've got to start winning with men, and they have really helped. Now, since about 2019, 2020, that's really when our focus started to go on to, well, it's not just about men, it's also about women. And actually, it's not just about women, it's also about the accessibility teams to ensure that we are really thinking about how these partners are there to help us connect with all of those that we're trying to talk to. So that's the point that it started to become important that the club partnerships weren't solely just there to benefit the male side of the business. They also had to be progressive and allow us um, to start to have a more diverse conversation when it came to sport and football. So that's now why those clubs are really important. But as I said, I don't want to lie and say it was because they had strong women's team. That's not why the relationship started.
And you still activate across both the men's and women's teams, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess another key point here, and one that like I feel quite often gets kind of missed when talking about women's sport, is that there's also a lot of male fans of women's sport, right? Like the viewership of women's football, it's not 100% female. It's
No,
probably
I think it's actually 50% male.
yeah,
But yeah, we don't need to treat men and women's football the same. And the audiences, as you say, they're very different. There are men in there, but you see a lot of families in there, and you see a lot of younger male fans coming into women's football. It's a really I don't know if you've ever been to like a Chelsea women's football game at Stamford Bridge or a Man City game at the Joy Stadium, but the atmosphere is incredible. It's like it got a real community vibe with it that feels very different from the men's game. The men's game can feel quite tribal. The women's game doesn't have that. It's not to say either is better than the other. It's just different. But yeah, I think when it comes to quite a lot of men, they're like, I just love football. And whether that's football, in the kind of the historical traditional sense, or whether that's football watching women's game, which is incredible to watch and possibly taking their daughters or their wives or whatever down to a game. Like it's different. But I think we've got to get ourselves out of it's only men that watch the male game and it's only women that watch the female game. It's not. Everyone watches everything.
yeah. I completely agree. I think obviously with a lot of the activation you're doing on the grassroots side in terms of boosting female participation, that is very specifically targeting female consumers. But do you have, even within kind of like the football partnerships obviously started as a way to kind of resonate with male fans. Do you have almost like a male fan strategy for the female side? Is that something that
Uh, So we actually don't segment the audiences necessarily male and female. We segment the audiences in what level of fandom they're at. So you may have your kind of diehard super fans, or you have your kind of average fans, or you might have your fans that are, to be honest, you're only fans when it's a World Cup. We don't really split it by gender. If we were to create a campaign, we might buy media by gender, but I think we're more looking at it as what type of fan you are, and therefore what relationship you have with the game, as opposed to your gender.
Okay. The kind of follow-on question, and we will move on to kind of talk more specifically about the grassroots programs, the Breaking Limit program. But I'm curious because this is a question that gets asked a lot when it comes to women's sports is like this almost chicken and egg problem of like, does the audience come first or do brands need to invest to help build the audience?
I think brands need to come and invest to help play their role in building the sport, whether and that's not just the audience, it's just helping to build it. I think brands also need to ensure that they don't look at the women's sport in the same way that they would look at men's. And they shouldn't look at the metrics in the same way. We look at men's football as a reach opportunity. We look at women's football as a how do I drive more equity and strengthen the health of my brand. Um, but I think to help women's sports continue on the pathway that it's on at the moment, more brands need to come to the table. And to be honest, it's only really women's football that's getting this massive platform at the moment. Women's rugby is kind of getting it, maybe women's cricket. But if you think about sports more traditionally associated with women, like your hockeys, your netballs, your lacrosse, you don't see that anywhere. Like you don't get to consume that. And so there's so much that needs to be done to just help women's sport overall. And brands are an obvious place to go because they can come and help invest. They can come and put a spotlight on the sport and the athletes and tell stories in a creative way. So for me, I know you say it's chicken egg, but to be honest, I think brands probably need to come to the table first.
Mhm. And I think the other point you make there that's really valuable is like the value that a brand can bring outside of the sponsorship fee that they're paying directly to the rights holder. Because, for example, Rexona go and do a load of traditional advertising. They got loads of shelf space in tons of retail, like which then could have a picture of a player or a logo of a team that then gives them additional exposure, which is going to help raise awareness of the fact they're playing, or there's going to be a campaign, or I think Sky Sports coverage of certain programs was sponsored by Rexona because I remember seeing like Lauren James adverts kind of pre and post maybe Sky Sports News. I might be getting that slightly wrong, but
No, you're not. We've had a long-standing media relationship with Sky, doing like what we like idents on their Sky Sports News. So you've got that right.
so yeah, I guess the point I'm trying to make is like there's a lot more kind of visibility, and actually a really recent example from Ally, who do a lot of women's sports sponsorship in the US, was they're using their NASCAR partnership to promote Unrivaled, which is the 3v3 basketball league, to promote the basketball to NASCAR fans, right? So they're like leveraging one relationship against another to build up the profile. I think that's a really good example of a brand that goes beyond kind of just here's some sponsorship money that's going to help you. It's like we can actually help you in more ways than
Yeah.
just cash
And
on
it
the table.
and it should never just be a badging exercise. I mean, whether it's male sport partnerships, whether it's female sport partnerships, Rexona isn't there to just sort of hand over the money. It's about what shared values do we have and like what can we do together that is going to benefit both sides. Um, and through that kind of collaborating and you can create some great stuff. And I think we've shown a bit of that with our work with FIFA and UEFA, but also with the clubs in terms of the clubs have been very involved with the likes of the Breaking Limits program, but actually they're also very involved with coming to us with like creative ideas for social content that we could be creating, and helping us create it. So, it's all about how you actually technically become a true partnership and work together to essentially help grow one another, but especially when it comes to the women's side, help grow the sport.
Yeah, I guess growing the sport is a really good segue into. I know you've mentioned it a few times now, but maybe you could give an explanation of exactly what the Breaking Limits program is and the objectives there.
Yeah, so the Breaking Limits program, it launched in 2021, and it launched with the vision to help young people, and young people is quite a broad spectrum. It's kids age 9 to 24, um, the opportunity and the confidence to be active. It's live in 11 markets around the world, and a lot of the key markets probably listening in on the phone. And we have two sides to it. Firstly, we partner with NGOs, for example, the likes of Special Olympics or Love Football or Street Soccer. And we partner with them to help educate coaches, community workers, teachers on how to ensure that they are creating an environment where everyone feels welcome and able to be physically active. So we have training materials on how to support girls into sport, or how to support people with different physical abilities, or how to help people within the LGBTQI plus community, how to create an environment that feels both physically and mentally safe for them. And then also what kind of tools and games you could be doing that help break down people's sort of embarrassment or lack of confidence to actually start physically moving, like through different kind of gaming scenarios. Um, then with those NGOs, what we then do on top of that is provide them with funding. And that funding they use in a way that helps them essentially better service the community. And so they can use that funding however they want. It might be that they are building another unit, or they might be painting a wall, or they might be buying equipment. But essentially, it's about the funding we give them is to ensure that they are physically able to run as an organization. The other side we have is through schools, and working with schools in both primary and secondary setting through physical education and the PHSE to help teachers ensure that all kids are feeling confident to participate. And through, like, say, the PHSE, it's more helping kids talk about what possibly can make someone feel not confident to take part, and to help them break down any beliefs they may have that you should or shouldn't move in certain ways. Like, why can't a short girl play basketball, or why can't a boy be a ballerina, and so on. So we sort of help with that. So that is essentially what the Breaking Limits program is. It's essentially helping to ensure that kids have that confidence, but also that opportunity. The schools is a sort of very broad approach to it. It's really trying to cover nationally all kids, but through the NGOs, there's a real focus on those communities that have been left behind. So we are working with NGOs that are specific to girls' sports, or NGOs that are specific to kids with either physical disability or a mental disability. Or we're working with kids that are coming from like really tough and poor backgrounds, where they don't even own a pair of like football boots or trainers. So, the NGO side is really like the deep impact working with those kids that have been truly left behind, but the schools is a bit more broad. So that's essentially what the Breaking Limits program is. I love it personally. We've appeared on Laureus's Sport for Good Index for 3 years in a row now, which for us is brilliant, which shows that we're doing some good within the sport for development area. Um, so yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah, and clearly fits the brand ethos of getting people moving and trying to figure out like why people wouldn't move, and then how can
Yeah.
you play a role in changing that, which then hopefully means they move more and need or want to use your deodorant. I guess if you're like bringing it
Yeah.
back to the sales, because I guess that's one area here is like I guess you have different objectives. One is obviously you're already the leading brand by quite a margin, you mentioned, for deodorant. So obviously you want to retain that or maybe extend it. And then on the other side, it's about like how do you build a strong brand ethos and continue to build that brand image? How do you weigh up when it comes to partnerships?
As in, how do we weigh it up when we look at the Breaking Limits program versus like a FIFA, or how to bring them together?
More so like when you're pitching something for budget as a partnership and you're saying like we could do breaking limits or we could go spend X amount more on Facebook ads that's going to drive this many more sales of deodorant. What is it that leads you to the answer of doing something like breaking limits where there's obviously an amazing outcome in terms of getting people moving, but it's
Mm.
harder to, I guess, people that come from the sponsorship world might think this is obvious, but for people that are coming from outside of sponsorship and maybe work in other areas of the industry, like That's a question I guess that people are always curious about, is kind of like, how do you put an ROI on a sponsorship program like that?
Yeah, and luckily today we haven't been given that ultimatum of it's either this or that. But it's not that I'm not conscious of that the whole time. Especially in like more challenging economic times. And you have to look at them very differently. Like when we look at, say, more your FIFAs and your Man Cities and your Chelseas, there's a very measurable ROI associated with them, which are kind of using more traditional business metrics. When it comes to the likes of a Breaking Limits program, it can be quite hard to tie that back to direct sales. But what we know that it has the ability to do is really to improve the equity of the brand. At the end of the day, um, deodorants as a category, it's a very autopilot shopper decision making process. Like you go into a supermarket and you probably don't give a huge amount of thought to the process and you almost grab what stands out to you. Um, we don't want people to just grab what stands out to them. We want people to go into that supermarket knowing that the brand they want is Rexona or Shaw or Degree, etc. Um, that's because that brand stands for more than just deodorant at the end of the day. It is doing more than just deodorant. So we hope the likes of the Breaking Limits program show that Rexona as a brand is one that consumers can trust in, especially in times like today, that we're doing good beyond just the good of stopping people sweat. And um, there is a direct thread in terms of like that storytelling of, we're a brand that wants people to move more. We want people to move more, yes, because if you move more, you're more likely to use more deodorant. But where aren't people able to move more? Well, those people need help. And if we're going to be partnering with the elite, like the most elite of the elite when it comes to sports partnerships, like you don't get more elite than FIFA, there is a responsibility to think what you can be doing at the other end of the scale. Like, if I'm going to be giving all this money to FIFA, then how can I help people that something like FIFA seems like so far away from them? So for me, it's really looking at it from that point of view. But as I said, like, it's not like every day I don't wake up and just hope that we will never have to have a horrible conversation around the Break and Limits program, because to me, it's doing some real good and it is trying to make a difference.
Yeah, and like you say, there is a clear, like, tangible narrative of saying like, well, if we can get more people moving, that's more potential customers that right now maybe don't need to use the product as much. And there's going to be an extra level of brand sentiment. When you're in the supermarket, you're looking at the shelf and you're like, oh, well, like that brand stands out to me because I know that they were involved in getting my kid or getting me active in sport. You're more likely to go and grab that can off of the shelf than the one next door that maybe hasn't done anything specifically to help you or a friend or someone that you care about. So I completely get that. I was just curious to hear if there was like any kind of internal kind of like, not conflict, but like discussion that you have to have where it's like one or the other. But I guess as a brand of your size, you can afford to do both at quite hefty scale. And that's probably the ultimate outcome, is that you're able to leverage a lot of these different verticals all at once,
Yeah,
uh, and have like multiple touch points. And then it does become very difficult, I guess, to measure which touch point it was that led to the sale, because you
that is really hard.
and being part of the Breaking Limits program and really like Lauren James or Lucy Bronze. And then it's like, well, which bit of it was it that led you to buy the deodorant? All of
Yeah.
it.
Because I think, especially, if you think about the media landscape today, there's so much usually going on at the same time that it is very hard to get down to that specific, like, what was that specific driver that got you to purchase us? You can get to it through testing if you need to and research, but it's not so obvious as it was, say, 5, 10 years ago, where you knew exactly what was on air at what time because nothing else was on air, or you knew exactly what promotions were happening where. But now it's such a vast landscape, it's very hard to isolate it down to like one specific trigger.
Yeah. And when it comes to evaluating new partners, like what is it that you're specifically looking for? Or like you say, it's very hard to pick out one specific thing, but like what is it that attracts you to a potential new partner or makes you think about moving into a certain sport? I know, for example, you know, Rexona used to be in partnership with Williams F1. Feels like F1 has got even more popular since then. So
Yeah,
what was it?
actually. I can't wait till Drive to Survive comes on Netflix. I'm literally counting down the days. It's a shame it didn't exist when we partnered with them. Although actually, if you go back to the very early series of Drive to Survive, you can still see our branding on Williams, which I like to hold on to. So, so we actually worked before Williams, we worked with Lotus. And F1 is a really tricky landscape when it comes to partnerships in the sense that, you're asking markets to heavily invest and go in on activating around F1, and they may or may not have a race coming to their country. And then if they do have a race coming to their country, I mean, the race is there for 3 days. It's not there for like an entire season or like with a World Cup where it's there for like 5 or 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And then branding in F1 is very static, which then when you've got 5 brand names is a nightmare. So
Mm.
I can only have one brand name on that car and I can only have one brand name on that uh, all in one. And I can only have one brand name in a static perimeter board around the race.
Yeah.
It just became increasingly difficult for us to navigate when we are a very global brand that has different identities around the world. So, it was a really exciting time when we worked with Williams, but I think you do sometimes have to assess like, is this a lot for a very little that we're actually able to get back out of it?
Yeah.
And they were actually a brilliant partnership to work with in terms of, when we go into partnerships, we really look at what are those shared values? What do we want to do together? What do we want to create together? So on that level, it was perfect. And as I said earlier, we don't go into any partnership thinking that this is a badging exercise. It's not. It's all about, do we both share a value in the sense that sport is wonderful, or we want people to be more active and this is a great vehicle for it. And then we both share a value and this is what we're going to do together as opposed to us just passing over money.
Yeah.
So those are really where our partnerships all start. And then obviously underneath that, you've got all the various, like, oh, this is what deliverables you're going to get and this then we work out how we're going to activate them, but it's at that top level of, do we have the same like vision and wants from this, and are we both committed to making this a true partnership versus just kind of old fashioned sponsorship. um the Williams was wonderful, it was exciting and all of that, but it just became more and more complex for us to navigate from a brand.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting answer. I think like it reminds me a little bit of a conversation with Paddy Carberry from Guinness when he was talking about the Premier League and the fact that you could activate every week, like every match week, basically almost all year round in almost every market in the world because everyone follows the Premier League. So I can imagine there's a similar scenario with Chelsea and Man City where a player is probably relevant almost in any market. And then I guess you mentioned a few ambassadors of different clubs, which is probably you identifying like, oh, maybe we don't resonate quite so strongly in Colombia, so we'll use Louis Diaz or whoever it might be, right? So
Yeah.
that completely makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, football is one of those few sports that really does have that year-long narrative to it. Like I would love to work on an Olympics, like absolutely love to. But when you think about it from a brand point of view, depending if it's winter or summer, you're like, it's at minimum every 2 years. And then it's 2 weeks. Then obviously you've got the Paralympics. And you've got such a small window where you've got people's attention and people's like mental availability is on it. And that's quite hard. Whereas like when you've got these partnerships that really work with your annual plan, it's a much easier conversation to have and it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, and I guess with Unilever's broader deals with the World Cup and the Euros, because you've got the men's and women's and you've got them kind of intersecting, you've almost got something every year.
Yeah. And we also have with the FIFA deal, like CONCACAF Gold Cup, to drop in there as well.
Yeah.
Um, and then we've got deals with UEFA at the moment, which also kind of like intersperse with that. So, and I think also when you look at the likes of a World Cup, especially the men's tournament, and the sense that it's so tribal and ingrained into how we live, that build up to a World Cup is way more long lasting than say an Olympics is. Like it's, as soon as that kind of roster is released at the end of this year, I think it's December, you're going to have fans around the world basically planning 2026 around their World Cup plans. that's very different.
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like we could talk a lot more about potential parts, but we're almost out of time. So if there's anything you wanted to finish with in terms of future plans, then now's your chance.
I mean, we just got some really exciting stuff this year. We've got Copa Libertadores, we've got the Women's Europeans, we are in the thick of it. We're planning for the Men's World Cup like next year. We also had some really good products on shelf, so please go out and buy them because they are very good. They are better than everyone else. And but no, like Andy, thank you so much for having me. This has been fun, and I hope everyone enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been really fun. And I actually do have Shore deodorant in the bottom of my bag whenever I'm like commuting into London because you're just getting on and off the tube. It's like freezing cold outside, really hot on the tube.
So yeah,
It's good.
I feel like we should have like a public service and just put samples of our products on the tube. That would be helping society, wouldn't it?
Exactly. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for listening to the Sports Planet podcast. I'll include more info about the guest and the topics covered in the show notes. And you can also find my LinkedIn profile if you'd like to connect and let me know what you thought. Visit sportsplanet.co to find previous editions of the podcast, access the newsletter, and to sign up for our WhatsApp group and see upcoming social events in cities around the world. See you again soon.